we have with us Julia Kirby, who's the senior editor at the Harvard University Press, is the author of multiple books, and is also on the steering committee of the Global Beta Drucker Forum. Julia, thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to be here, Kumar. Thank you for having me.
Julia, taking off on one of your books where you speak about AI and its all-pervasive sort of future in our lives. It's making inroads into education, into work. Where do you see this interplay along with the role of the CLO and the future of work?
Yeah, thanks for bringing up that book. When Tom Davenport and I wrote that book, it's called Only Humans Need Apply. The thing that interested us was that everyone has this great fear that, or there is sort of a popular culture fear put out there of the robots are coming to take all of our jobs, and that there would be, just massive workforce displacement, and possibly we would even have to get into major social remedies like a universal basic income, because people would just simply be left with no work to do. And so we know a lot of organizations, and we were familiar with a lot that were kind of early adopters of AI, and I guess I would say as a larger class, sort of intelligent machines, because they don't all incorporate technically AI, but analytics, data-driven decision-making kind of toolkit. And so we found that, in fact, that wasn't happening. No one was laying off people as they brought in this new machinery, and but that work roles were changing a lot. And the reason they were changing is that as the AI is introduced and it starts to take away some cognitively challenging part of your role, your workday, then what do you fill the time with? So what is it that you're taking on as you're having time freed up by this new toolkit? And so we said, okay, you sort of step aside in a way to make room for this new kind of digital workmate. And a lot of people just envision that, okay, I'm going to be working with, in this augmented way by this equipment, and I'm going to now be freed up to do some parts of the job that maybe still rely on more human skills. And so we said, okay, that's actually one thing that's going on. But there are 4 other ways too in which people are adjusting to the new reality. So if we call that one stepping aside, I guess, kind of giving the toolkit its space and then you doing your more human space. There's also kind of a stepping up requirement that's created by this, which is that now that there is this toolkit, it's sort of a managerial task. It's very much a managerial task to figure out, okay, which tools should we be investing in, because it's a very fast moving space, and how do we kind of redesign the work processes and the roles. And so we call that's a stepping up from this new reality. And then we also had stepping in, which is someone who's actually working intimately enough with these tools that they understand and can interpret where maybe the AI is getting something wrong or producing a biased result, which is a big problem with AI. And they're effectively interpreting for others, why did the AI do that? And understanding when the AI is getting it wrong and needs to be tweaked. We had a couple of other steps too, having to do with kind of inventing the next generation. And so stepping forward would be helping to build the next generation of AI solutions. So there's actually lots of work, and this framework we created of 5 different steps you can take with respect to AI is kind of how we saw the whole universe of new work that's being created by a set of tools that people have thought were going to just simply take work away. So you might think, okay, how does this, I know you're, the audience that we're speaking to today are their chief learning organizations and their organizations. And you might say, okay, how does that, how do these things apply to that work? I think, you know, education in general is something that AI is just so useful in. On the one hand, it can kind of hyper customize, hyper tailor these, I guess, learning modules or learning, you know, learning approaches for individual learners by kind of allowing someone to make this constant, steady, kind of gratifying progress on, you know, in learning some domain of topics. And at the same time, of course, there's this great feedback loops that get created by any kind of digital learning system, which allows the actual approach to keep getting better based on seeing how it's working for a population of learners. And so we're going to see a huge amount more encroachment of these smart tools into the learning space. And I'm sure I'm not telling, you know, anyone in the CLO community any news with this, because they are, you know, very avid adopters of this kind of technology. But, you know, don't we all still think on some level, look, we still got to have the human element in here. And so this kind of creates this question for you of how are you going to amp up that part of the teaching experience, the instructor's role? How are you going to make sure that the instructor is making the most of the time that is being freed up for them by the AI that's being used in the kind of almost drill instruction mode? And it's nice though, because within the corporate learning space, you already have this great model in place where a lot of people have executive coaches, and we believe very strongly in the business community in mentoring and coaching. So unlike, you know, in a public school, you have this role in place of that you have an executive coach who's really working on that soft skill level, and their ability to be effective is very much about their human ability to connect, to empathize, to think creatively. And so if you think about taking more of those people who have been involved in instruction roles and turning them into that kind of coaching relationship with people. So I just went on for a very long time in response to a simple question, but I hope that's
some great points there. You know, and if we say that, you know, some of the role will be, like you said, stepping aside, some of it will be, you know, stepping in, you know, to AI, then what should be the sort of the strategic ask from the CLO by, let's say, the CEO or the board? What should then be the strategic ask, given that AI could be playing that augmenting role as well?
Yeah, so it's a great question. What does the C-suite demand of the chief learning officer, and what should they demand? And I think, you know, part of the answer has to do with this new world of AI augmented learning. And of course, that is something that I would ask as a CEO. What's your plan there? How are you approaching the selections that you're making out of all the available and kind of over the horizon tools that could be applied in this way? And how are we, and then on the other side of that coin, what are we doing to prepare our entire workforce for the kind of job transformation that we're going to see with a more, you know, what's happening with AI is really, it's the automation of knowledge work. I mean, when people think about automation, they are almost always thinking, you know, at the Henry Ford level or something, you know, or the I should say GM in the 60s and 70s kind of level of where you're bringing it to work that was, you know, dangerous, dirty, dull, you know, kind of physical kind of tasks that are very repetitive. And I don't think a lot of people have really come to terms with what we're now seeing is the automation of, you know, the brains and not just the brawn. And that this is really fundamentally going to change how work gets done in office settings. So, I mean, that, I guess, you know, if there's a job one for a learning organization in the 21st century, it's probably to deal with that learning curve, to deal with how are we going to introduce these things? What are the change management elements that go along with this kind of transformation? But also, you know, the irony of this is that as you bring in these tools increasingly to do work that has been done by, you know, college-educated, high-skilled employees, what will really happen is that the value of those people and what they still do in the workplace will become even more the source of your competitive advantage. So you're not removing people as a source of competitive advantage. There's a real need to make sure that they are extremely well augmented by these tools so that their efforts are focused on the things that will really move the needle most, you know. So think about innovation. Like innovation will become even more than it is now, the key to competitive success. And that is going to rely on some skills that have not been, probably never will be, built into machinery.
Right. You said something really important, Julia. You know, that the quality of work will have to sort of step up, and the individuals and the organization as a whole will have to sort of move up the curve and let AI take care of some of the other tasks. You know, in the current environment with the pandemic, you know, lockdowns, work from home, and you know, the kind of general vulnerability that even the leaders feel at some level. What is the importance of, you know, self-management and sort of overall fitness and agility from a mindset perspective for leaders going forward?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I guess I'm going to reach first to Peter Drucker. You mentioned my involvement in the Drucker Forum, and so, I mean, I would recommend anyone who hasn't read Drucker or who hasn't read Drucker lately to go back to some of his thinking on this. But he always made this distinction between executives who do the right things and who do things right. You know, I mean, I guess sort of everyone kind of focuses on, am I doing things right? But he said it's the executive's role to understand what are the right things to do, and that defines effectiveness. I mean, it's a huge job these days to be a leader in a multinational organization. I mean, just the scope of operations, and of course, the long-term trend has been toward delayering organizations. So one person now kind of is responsible for quite a span of operations and people. And it's just a huge job. You really cannot do it all. You have to focus on where your application of your own energy is going to move the needle most. So there are a couple things I would say you should probably be thinking about very closely as an executive. One is getting out of your bubble. It's such an easy thing to say, an obvious thing to say, but people just do not realize how they become encased in a bubble. And I would say the pandemic has brought this into sharp relief, that if you, as a senior leader, you kind of have a unique responsibility in the organization to recognize when a change is necessary and to motivate the organization to make that change. So how are you going to recognize that a change is necessary if you are not subjecting yourself to kind of data from the fringes? If you're not, if you don't have those sensors out beyond your immediate circle, which is really very much an echo chamber. So, number one job, I think, for managers at all times to be effective is to get out of their bubble. And in the pandemic, how much harder is that? The other thing I would say is that I think a lot of leaders are not really aware of the scrutiny that they're under by their organizations. This is just kind of basic evolutionary psychology, but it's been proven so many times that all eyes are on the leader. Everyone kind of visually checks the leader for how should I be responding to something? How should I be behaving in a situation? And what this should mean for the leader is that you should be very mindful, very deliberate about what are you modeling, because whether you like it or not, your kind of, number one impact on your organization is as a model of certain types of thinking. So are you the kind of leader who is celebrating innovation? Are you the kind of leader that is making decisions based on data or based on an inclusive process? What you are doing is super important too. And so the question is, what do you want to see more of in your organization? And then how are you personally modeling that? So those are two things I would talk about: getting out of the bubble, personally modeling what you want to see more of in the organization.
Both great points, and certainly something we need more of, as we try and get out of this, pandemic into the post-pandemic world. We come to the end of the session, but thank you so much, Julia, for joining us and some great insights, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you. This has been fun. Hope we'll do it again.